Neil Barofsky, until reading your book, Bailout, I thought that TARP was an example of government success. So straighten me out. Where did I go wrong?
Well, it's not your fault. This is sort of part of the current revisionist history of viewing TARP through a very specific lens. But it's unfortunately that lens is sort of divorced from the reality of what TARP was supposed to do and what it's actually done. When TARP was passed, it's not that long ago, 2008, the promise was not just that the bill was going to help rescue Wall Street, save the largest financial institutions from collapsing in among themselves, and bringing our entire financial system down with them. That would never have gotten through Congress. So Treasury had to promise, and Congress required, that there was more than that. TARP was supposed to do things like reinvigorate the economy. It wasn't just to give banks the money, but once they had the money, that they would use it and lend it and put it back into the economy so we can have real economic growth. And one of the most important things that gets left out in this sort of new revisionist history, TARP does not get through Congress, but for the promise from Treasury that it would use those funds not just to help the banks, but help struggling homeowners and deal with the foreclosure crisis. And while it is certainly true, I believe that TARP, among other things, helped stave off an even bigger financial collapse and potentially taking down our entire system, it utterly failed in all of those other very important goals that have been left behind.
And some of those TARP funds were used for the auto bailout. So was that a success or a failure? It's hard listening to the presidential candidates at this point. What's your view?
Look, I just remember what it was like back in 2008. One of the things I talk about in the book, my first day, I go to Hank Paulson's office, I get sworn in. I'm a former federal prosecutor from New York. I've never really been to Washington before in any significant way. And the first thing he tells me is that Chrysler and GM are about to go under. They're about to go bankrupt and it's going to wreck the economy. And that they're going to use TARP funds in order to bail them out because Congress had just essentially voted down congressional relief to the auto companies. And I think it's very difficult to say, looking back now, that it would have been necessarily a good idea to let them founder. I mean, so many of this stuff is this sort of counterfactual revisionist history, so it's impossible to know. But I would say that the way that auto bailouts were managed, in some respects, was done very, very poorly. So you can have, okay, we needed to save them, but the way they were managed, and one of the things to talk about in the book is how the auto dealers were handled. And it was sort of shocking at the time to learn that there really was no analysis that went into Treasury's decision, and ultimately they directed the auto companies to shut down 2,000 auto dealers immediately without much analysis, putting up to 100,000 jobs in jeopardy at the depth of the recession. And that type of mismanagement, short-sightedness, really was throughout the management of the bailouts.
Well, one of the prime managers and architects of TARP was Secretary Tim Geithner. He's the Treasury Secretary. And he comes off as the Moriarty to your Holmes in the book. So tell me, is he a puppet of the banks?
No, I mean, he's not a puppet. But what he is he sort of embodies everything that is kind of wrong with our regulatory system and how captured it's become from the interests of Wall Street. And that's more of the problem, is that at every critical juncture in the bailouts, when a major decision had to be made, Tim Geithner was there, and he consistently chose the interests of frankly, a small group of elite financial institutions here on Wall Street over Main Street, over homeowners. And that was always the primary interest. Even in the homeowner program, the one that was supposed to help Main Street, the explicit program, even that, as I talk about in the book, he explicitly stated to us that it was about foaming the runway for the banks, extending out the foreclosure crisis more than helping homeowners. And that's one of the explanations, I think, as to why that program has been such a disastrous failure.
Well, speaking of Wall Street's control over Washington, when you saw Jamie Dimon testifying to a group of congressmen whose campaigns he donated to, what were you thinking?
I mean, it was embarrassing. I think it was somewhat shameful. Not all of them. I mean, I think there were one or two senators that distinguished themselves. But overall, it was a wonderful, wonderful snapshot of what's wrong in this country. When I got to Washington, I was shocked when I saw the degree to which Wall Street controlled Washington, controlled Treasury, and as you saw, a certain degree, controlled the Senate. And again, I saw that through the way Treasury administers those programs. That same level of deference is so baked into the culture of our regulators that it wasn't terribly surprising to see, if remarkably depressing. Even in the TARP, when decisions were made over and over again, I heard from both administrations how they were afraid to do anything tough on the banks because the banks may quit the program or might just walk away. There was never a question of who had the leverage, and it was never the government.
This market is fewer
stock
players.
pickers market.
Stocks have rallied this year.
We're coming into a Monday where we're going to